evening, everyone. We're so glad you're here. And if you're joining us online, we are glad you are with us online. Let's all sing together today. Blue skies and rainbows and sunbeams from heaven are what I can see. When my Lord is living in me, I know that Jesus is well and alive today. He makes his home in my heart. Nevermore will I be all alone, since he promised me that we never would part. Tall mountains, green valleys, the beauty that surrounds me all makes me aware of the one who made it all. I know that Jesus is well and alive today. He makes his home in my heart. Nevermore will I be all alone, since he promised me that we never would part. All right, let's stand up. All right. I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never fly o'er the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never fly o'er the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. All right, have a seat, and let's have our lesson. We're so thankful everyone is here.
All right, good evening, everyone. So tonight, we're going to be studying from 1 Samuel chapter 15, verses 1 through 35. So, in our first picture here, we actually have pictures tonight. Samuel told King Saul that God had a job for him to do, so Saul should listen closely to the words he was going to tell him. God said that he remembered what mean King Agag had done to the Israel in the past, and God did not forget that he had said the mean King Agag and the Amalekites would be destroyed. In this lesson, God tells King Saul to completely and utterly destroy the Amalekites. Everyone and everything of the Amalekites was to be destroyed, even the sheep and cattle. God told King Saul not to spare anyone or anything. God was very clear and expected King Saul to obey him. Here's a picture of King Saul going to battle. The first thing King Saul did was to count his soldiers. There were 200,000 footmen and 10,000 men of Judah. That was a lot of soldiers. They went to a city where the Amalekites lived. Then King Saul and his army fought with the Amalekites until no one was left alive except the Amalekites' king, King Agag. And there he is. King Saul did not kill King Agag. He took the best of all the sheep and cattle and everything that was good. Uh-oh. Is that what God had told King Saul to do? No. Saul disobeyed the Lord. Do you remember our friend, the prophet Samuel? He was the prophet that anointed King Saul last week when we made the crowns. Remember these? The Lord told Samuel that he was sorry that he had made Saul king over Israel because Saul did not obey the Lord's commands. When God said this to Samuel, Samuel was sad too, and Samuel cried all night because of Saul disobeying God. When we disobey God, it makes him unhappy. Let's find out what happens next. Early the next morning, Samuel went to meet with King Saul. King Saul came out to meet Samuel and said, Blessed be the Lord. I have performed the commandment of the Lord. But Samuel said, what does this mean? I hear the bleating. What does bleating mean? It's like bah of a sheep. And the mooing of oxen. What do oxen sound like? Moo. Yep. King Saul then told a lie. He said that the people, not himself, had spared the best of everything, but they destroyed everything else. Saul had disobeyed God, and then he lied about it. Uh-oh. Samuel knew that that Saul had disobeyed and lied. He's mad. He's telling him he's wrong. King Saul, that disobeying the Lord and always better than sacrificing to the Lord, and disobeying, which is what Saul had done, was a sin. Because of King Saul's sin and disobeying, God didn't want Saul to be king over his people anymore. Saul had rejected God's word, so God had rejected Saul as king. Saul told Samuel that he had sinned. He said that he feared the people and obeyed the people's voice instead of God's. Saul asked Samuel to pardon his sin and to return with him. But Samuel said that he could not because God had rejected Saul as king over Israel. As Samuel turned to go away, King Saul reached out and took hold of Samuel's mantle, which was a loose piece of clothing without sleeves that was worn over Samuel's other clothes. When Saul did this, Samuel's mantle tore. Samuel said, "The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you this day and has given it to another who is better than you." Saul asked again for forgiveness, and he and Samuel worshipped the Lord together. Samuel helped Saul obey all of God's orders. Then Samuel went back to his home, and Saul went back to his home, and Samuel never saw Saul again. The Bible tells us that Samuel felt sad that Saul had disobeyed the Lord and was sorry he had made Saul king over Israel. How very, very sad that King Saul disobeyed God. Don't worry, that's not the end of the story. Next week we will learn that God has a plan for another, better king to rule over Israel. It's kind of a sad lesson tonight, right? King Saul did the wrong thing. So I believe we've got some discussion questions at your tables, and we will pause for that now.
Okay, friends, are we ready to do our craft? Yes. Yay, good. I loved hearing you talking over the questions with your family and talking through what should Georgette do. Should she obey her mom? Should she say, "Oh, I just forgot"? And I liked that you were talking through all of those things, and I heard you deciding she should obey. She should do what she was supposed to do, just like we wish that King Saul had done what he was supposed to do. Tonight's craft is pretty simple, okay? We're going to do the second craft. If you flip over your questions on the back, there's two crafts. I'm going to show you the second craft, and you have the coloring page on your tables. If you don't have enough, I have more in the back, okay? So here's what you're going to do. Take a look at this picture. I would love for you to talk more at your tables about what's happening in this picture. It was the last picture of our story. Look at their faces. Look at Samuel's hands on his hips. What's happening? That would be a good thing to talk about at your tables. You can color this. Okay, there's crayons at your tables. And then at the top, you can write tonight's memory verse. Tonight's memory verse can be found in 1 Samuel 15:22. And that's on your questions as well. And you can write that bubble because the person that's speaking is Samuel, okay? And he's saying it to Saul. And one thing that he was frustrated about was all those sheep he had taken. So you have some sheep stickers in your buckets. And if there's not enough of those, I have more of those too. And you can put those in the corners. And that's tonight's craft.